The expansive infrastructure milestones realized during my term has been built on the foundation of hard work and sacrifices of previous generations. Where they built an ordinary bridge, we built a floating one in Mombasa. Where there was a single-lane road, we have built multi-lane highways. Where once lay a railway in ruins, we executed the largest infrastructure project in Africa through the standard gauge railway and revived 566 kilometers of the meter gauge railway. This has resulted in new areas of our country opening up.
Between 2013 and 2022, Kenya has had a president with lofty ambitions of the country's infrastructural and logistical capabilities. From roads to rails, to ports, to last-mile power connectivity, President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration has been grand on infrastructure projects. But grand projects mean grand budgets, and that has been a pressure point in the Jubilee administration's 10 years in power. Deficits have widened, public debt has ballooned. We want to assess the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta through the lens of arguably the indelible signature of his 10 years in power: mega-sized infrastructure projects. When the Jubilee government assumed power in April 2013, it did so with a bold promise with regard to the expansion of road infrastructure. According to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, Kenya had 11,230 kilometers of bitumen, popularly known as tarmac roads, in 2013. The country had 52,400 kilometers of earthen ore and tarmac roads. By 2020, the Bureau of Statistics indicates that the country had 20,655 kilometers of tarmac road, implying the Jubilee administration had tarmacked 9,425 kilometers of road.
In 2012-2013, Jubilee government actually gave a very, very ambitious promise in the road sector to do 10,000 kilometers of roads. And that time, it looked like just another promise, because people were giving promises left, right and center. It looked very, very overambitious. But today, that has been exceeded. Now we have 11,500 kilometers of roads against the target of 10,000, which was supposed to be done within 10 years. And now it's just done just over 9 years.
Economic pundits contend that this ambition was not unfounded. The state of the business climate necessitated bold efforts to ensure Kenya's status as a logistics and commercial hub was elevated and remained competitive when benchmarked against regional peers.
The reason why infrastructure has been the key focus of governments in the last 20 years is not by accident, or it's not because of legacy or because of that. It's because the businesses in this country have complained in the last 20 years about, competitiveness, lack of competitiveness in the region. And the reason is because of the high cost of freight, the high cost of energy, and those things. And so when President Uhuru came in 2013, its first budget, he promised that the cost of freight from Mombasa to Nairobi will reduce from 140,000, on a 20-foot container to 30,000. Of course, these things didn't happen even with the SGR up to now.
The good intentions notwithstanding, Kenya's stock of public debt today officially estimated to be 8.4 trillion shillings, and the fact that 67 out of every 100 shillings raised in tax revenue is used to service debt obligations are raising question as to whether the Jubilee administration has exercised prudence in its push for grand infrastructure projects. Some have argued that perhaps the government sought to do too much within a very short period, the net effect being an economy drowning in debt.
We've had a period in which we piled on a lot of debt, and that has we can now see that that is causing us some problems. You see, economic development is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And what the Uhuru government or administration did was to try and do a lot of things within a period of 10 years, a short period. And the repercussions are what we are facing now. There's a huge amount of projects and infrastructure, mainly infrastructure projects that were done. That cost us a lot. And I think in the short term, we're going to pay the price.
The Institute of Economic Affairs argues that the Jubilee administration, in its appetite for grand infrastructure, failed in the crucial fiscal task of disciplining expenditure and ensuring that the government's revenues and expenses actually balanced out.
It is very clear now that there's a huge public debt overhang. Big payments are coming forth, and obviously those payments will stress and will limit the scope that any government has to expand new things. So first, I think we have to be very, very clear with promises. This is not we are not going to have a Santa Claus administration. So that's the first thing. Just to be honest that, look, we will have very limited scope. So that's the first one. Secondly, it's also apparent to us that closing the deficit will not be done entirely by chasing new money. So I think we've harassed the Revenue Authority enough. They do a good job. But regardless of what happens, it is not clear that you can close the kind of gaps we have without disciplining expenditure.
The government, however, maintains that these enormous undertakings in the infrastructure sector were necessary in setting Kenya on the right path for accelerating growth and development at a time when peer economies in East and Central Africa seem to be stepping up competition for the regional hub status. In the 10 years of the Jubilee administration, there is arguably no single project which has stoked more controversy with regard to value for money than the standard gauge railway. Even at its sunset, the government maintains spirited defense of the project.
In 2017, 31st of May 2017, the President commissioned the SGR. Before May 31st, 2017, this country had waited 122 years for such a project to be done, because the last project was done in 1895. And so by launching that SGR, both for cargo, but also for passengers, Madaraka Express, that was a key major milestone in the railway sector. Additionally, we've done the commuter rail in Nairobi, refurbished, and people can use now from a railway station here in Nairobi all the way to Bakassi. They can go to Ruiru and so forth. It has been extended to Nanyuki. We've done the railway all the way to Kisumu. We've done the extension of the meter gauge from Logonot in Nakuru all the way to Malaba. So the railway sector also you can see for yourself, and many other arteries within the country.
Pundits argue that whereas projects such as the SGR and the Nairobi Expressway may be grand in scale, they are disproportionately lean on trickle-down and the impact on the lives of ordinary citizens.
Where are the priorities? Where are you putting money? Because on one hand, government has been arguing that they are spending on high-impact sectors, but really they are spending on gas and on energy and infrastructure. Is energy and infrastructure high impact, especially if you're doing grand scale projects that rely on imports, as opposed to, you could put money in infrastructure, but you do lower level roads that give local contractors work. So, we want to see what are the priorities.
Roads that have taken substantial amounts of money, like the expressway, over 90 billion. I think they may serve the country in the long term, but if you look at it in terms of cost-benefit analysis, in terms of the returns to the economy, in terms of the returns to the GDP, then you would not feel that. But I think he has put in quite a bit of money into infrastructure, but at a high price because of the loans.
You do the infrastructure so as to spur growth, and then basically to get the benefit of that infrastructure. Unfortunately, what I have a problem with is the rate of accumulating debt and the impact of this in terms of economic growth don't match. And I mean, you just have to look at the numbers. I think between 2011 and 2022, we've basically grown our debt at close to 20% on a compounded annual growth basis. And at the same time, during the same period, we had an average economic growth of about 4%. So that tells you that the accumulation of the debt basically does not justify the end, which is economic growth.
The government, however, disagrees that Kenyans have been saddled with projects which don't meet the requisite value for money thresholds. The Transport Cabinet Secretary argues that ascertaining that taxpayers stand to gain from a project is the core benchmark of undertaking projects of the scale of the SGR and the Nairobi Expressway.
We must, as a matter of routine, do what we call value for money assessment. You look at the cost and look at the benefit. You do that extremely professional process. In some case, we even hire an independent expert to go through that assessment of, as an independent expert to determine, is a country getting value for money? And this gives us assurance that indeed this project is not overpriced. You go through a very robust competitive process which involves international bidders. People who have done projects elsewhere, you invite them to make sure they put their bids. Those bids must be competitive. You do not prescribe the cost of the project. Yeah? You do a feasibility study first, but then you actually put in a very competitive process at international standard. So because these bidders would like to get the project, they will try to outdo each other by making sure they give you the best bid possible.
There is now growing consensus that the incoming government will need to rationalize expenditure on infrastructure with a view to addressing the debt burden and steer the economy on more sound economic footing.
We must also accept that infrastructural development has taken place in this country in the two administrations, that of Mwai Kibaki, the 10 years, including the Grand Coalition government. But also, we have had quite significant infrastructural development during President Uhuru's tenure, the 10 years now. We must now reduce or cut on infrastructural development because Kenya is now the 6th largest economy in the continent. We have one of the best infrastructure. Now we need to build on this the infrastructure that we have and invest now in people.
Some hold that it is not enough to cut back on infrastructure spending. The entire country needs a rethink, they argue, of just what constitutes infrastructure as an enabler in the business environment.
The Jubilee administration, which is inclusive of those I call Laurel and Hardy, the president and his deputy, gave us the impression that infrastructure is hard infrastructure in the form of new trains and stuff like that. The government of Kenya did very poorly in new water pipelines and sewage lines. So many manufacturing firms which wish to establish in some parts of this country to go out there where the resources are, where the natural resources, the resources that they need for inputs are unable to establish because they have to go back there, and some of them have to establish a sewage system or a system for collection or for treating refuse that makes the investment unviable, because those should be public goods.
You know, we can see roads, we can see maybe railways, we can see dams, we can see ports and all that. But I think the way in which it was done in a very aggressive manner, and also it was not very cost effective. How it was financed was not the best way to do it. And I think what's going to happen now is that that has cost us an imbalance that is now putting us at a very serious risk of having economic issues.
Julian's Amboko, NTV.